The first reading has entered into our liturgy, both in East and in West, because we have this Trisagion coming in, the Thrice Holy, Tris Hagios, Kadosh, 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 Holy, Holy, Holy. And it is something which collocates us in the Holy Other, which for a moment in time was half seen by the then neutral Isaiah, about to be made a great prophet, a great poet, a great speaker across the centuries, even to our time. This apartness, this otherness, this holiness is indicated by the presence that fills the temple. There is a whole ethos of presence suggested by smoke, which both in East and West still can be felt in the careful use of incense, accompanied by penetrating chant and interiorized prayer. And we have this movement, the shaking of the place to its foundations. There is something hugely cosmic going on. What was the experience? It was something again to be found in the Acts of the Apostles, when that same presence was being felt in the beginning of the history of the Church, after the fullness had come, after it had been accomplished. Fire, here tongues of fire, and the lips of this being called Isaiah, this new man, were felt to be unworthy of any message, and they were purified by coals from the altar, burning coals. In the prayer which in the old rite the priest recites secretly before daring to proclaim the words of the Holy Gospel, this is evoked. The essence of the prayer is still there in the new rite, but the old one is more complete. It's just been pruned in the new to make it more adjustable without having too many things making it heavy, because all the prayers were long in the old rite. Therefore we've just kept the essence of it, but the old one in its fullness is very beautiful, because it makes a parallel between the call of Isaiah and the call of the one about to read the Gospel and to preach, to be purified with that same fire that came from the altar. And the prayer is said in a spirit and in a posture of humility before the altar, before and only then one is opening one's mouth to speak in the name of Christ. One cannot proclaim with impure lips the words of the Logos himself, and as it were get away with it. Your actions speak so loudly that I can't hear what your words are saying. Pure lips. It is important that the one who preaches have pure lips. The preacher who then is quietly heard to raise his voice and even to swear and curse, to use the name of God or anything holy out of context, is already a contradiction and a self-defeating of the exercise. One cannot proclaim just a part of the message. The message is proclaimed with all one's life. As Blessed Charles de Foucault said, "Ce que tu as à dire, dis-le avec toute ta vie." What you have to say, say it with all your life. And indeed, he himself said very little, but said it all with his life and eventual martyrdom. The first encounter affected the whole life of this man, and he is always referring to the Holy One of Israel. So too, encounter with the presence, the Shekinah, the one inhabiting the cloud, is the starting point of all true communication. We cannot communicate one that we have not encountered. It applies to the preacher, it applies to anyone doing the work of God. We cannot communicate lies or just theories. We communicate life and experience. We are conductors of electricity, and we have to be plugged in to the source. Otherwise we're giving off our own thing, and it's very weak and has no lasting effect. The human has a human effect, the divine. And so we need to be good conductors, not in any way diminishing the current from passing. This beautiful passage is often meditated by those who come to the altar, especially when it comes to celebrating a solemn liturgy. We cannot just be performing theatre. We are having an experience parallel to that which Isaiah had. The people in our day are deprived of some of that, not all, but some, because it is not easy to find a solemn celebration. Often, at least in Ireland, one has to be content with the minimum, the quickie, the functional, the one that's valid, but that's it. One has to travel a long way to get the luxury of gratuitous incense, chant, and absorption into the divine over a long period of time. We are too much in a hurry to benefit fully from the encounter with the eternal. We do it on our own terms, as though God were a slot machine. We are too used to the immediate. We need something of the Hebraic attitude and of the Eastern attitude to this day amongst our Eastern brethren across the board. They are not in a hurry. 3 hours is not time wasted. God deserves attention, and when we give him that kind of attention, he is not lacking in generosity in giving us his own. And when he finds an empty channel, willing to wait a long time and to hang around a long time for a word, boy, is he glad to find an open heart, and we can be sure that he's not lacking in generosity to give it the word it needs. If we are so much aware of the clock that we cannot switch off for, if we're lucky, half an hour, then we're in spiritual trouble, and we will reap the fruits of our hurried praise. Going from quickie to quickie, in McDonald's style, until we reach the end of the motorway at the end of our life, and fall into the grave out of breath, meeting the eternal for the first time under his own terms. The Apostle Paul also was called unexpectedly, and he was sent, apostolane, he was sent, and he has to justify his being called out of time to those who were not willing to equate him with the other apostles. He may be using an expression thrown at him, one born out of time, a miscarriage, when he comes up with this unexpected term. But he is not shy in indicating his credentials. He was called directly and by you-know-who. The Lord himself was the one who called him in a spectacular way when he was being persecuted by him. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? His was a fulminating grace. He was struck blind, and he was stripped, mentally, spiritually, and at that 0 point, ground zero, he could rise again and say, Lord, what wilt thou have me to do? Thus giving the keys to the other one. And until that happened, he still was in control. But we need to do the same at ground zero, to hand over the keys. Lord, you are in control. Take over. But the will is the element that has to be taken over. And even in the spiritual life, we can still be in control by having our own program and having our own beautiful spiritual edifice in which the Lord actually is not reigning, but we are, and often at our own benefit. We can use spiritual structures for our own glory and be on a subtle ego trip in the service of the Lord. Such was not the case in Galilee when these fishermen were somewhat blue, that there was nothing moving, no joy all night. All these nets were empty. And this strange newcomer is able to give an order and be heard. And we know the consequences. A sign, the sign of the fish to be caught. Our Lady at Fatima indicated to the little children, after showing them hell, no less, that that was the place where sinners went, because there was no one there to pray for them or make sacrifices for them. And she is said, I haven't been able to follow it up, but it is said that she is said to have said that souls were falling into hell like snowflakes to the ground. If that is true, and it may well be true, then it is frightening, because it indicates the large number of souls across the world who are going all the time into the beyond, and mathematically that would make sense. It can be calculated from the billions there on the earth, and therefore the proportion dying, at working out roughly about 2 souls per second over the globe on average. It's a lot of souls. So if she in heaven can see things, and if it is true that she has said something of that nature, it may be close to the truth that over the level of the globe many souls are dying and few are actually dying well. We do not know. We do not know the proportion. But it is as well to be aware that this new doctrine, which is in the air and has been popularized by people like Hans Urs von Balthasar and Robert Barron, that there is a reasonable hope that all are saved, is something actually not classical and is close to a doctrine condemned by the Church in past centuries, the apokatastasis, the recapitulatio, the recapitulation of all things. It was an early heresy condemned because it denied the raison d'être of the redemption, and therefore of Calvary. And it is something which has no metaphysical sense. Either the fundamental option has been negative or it has not. In the case of Satan and his satellites, it was irreversible and total, and the consequences also cannot be reversed. Hence, there is no apokatastasis in their case. So also with the soul who perpetually and persistently, tenaciously and irreversibly says no, 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 no to divine grace, against the Creator's deepest desire and wish, that soul has an authority over itself and cannot then suddenly change that fundamental option once it is in the beyond. Metaphysically, it's the same essence that carries on, and the will carries on as it is. And as in the case of the demons, so in the case of the soul, once it has made that decision and wanted to keep it, that is respected. Therefore, the risk is there. We do not know the proportion, but it is not good to take away the seriousness of salvation. If we are saved, it means we are saved from something. If we have a Redeemer, we are redeemed from something. And to have this incomplete notion of salvation, that we are all automatically homeward bound, is dangerous, because it takes away the urgency of preaching. It takes away the urgency of evangelization. It takes away the urgency of Calvary itself. It takes away the urgency of martyrdom. All the heroic preachers and missionaries that we've had over the centuries, it makes a mockery of them. If it's all automatic, why bother? And so too, all our catechetical work. If we're all homeward bound automatically, why bother? And if the mercy of God is such that all is automatically pardoned and brought back to order, why bother? It's a misunderstanding of the true nature of God and of His mercy. God is infinitely mercy and infinitely on-side and cannot bear the thought of the loss of one's soul. But we can't logically humbly ask for pardon and expect it, but at the same time have a profound will to carry on with exactly the same act. One cannot say, please forgive me this sin which I have the intention of repeating. It is just flying in the face of grace and actually hardening the soul and the will. An abuse of grace leads to refraction of grace and its withdrawal eventually, and it leads us into spiritual hardness of heart. It is a soul in trouble, and we must be careful, because if we receive graces in that state, sacraments, without corresponding with them, then we are in a state of abusing God and bossing him around. And we cannot think that God is just somebody who takes anything like that. It doesn't quite work like that. God is always wanting our good, but we are our own worst enemy. And sin is sin, and it has its consequences if it is not adjusted. So just that to say that when it comes to handling the holiness of God, we must remember holiness is holiness, not a bit of sin encouraged, a bit of sin carried on as though it didn't matter. Holiness is something demanding. And when we come into the presence of our King, we're not coming there to boss him around, push him around, and treat him badly, which is what we do when we handle the sacraments badly or the presence of God in general. And Simon Peter was amongst the first to perceive that. The use of "I am a sinful man" is very Semitic. I am a man sinner. That's what we have in the Greek. And it is something which is close to the experience of any person coming into contact with fontal love and realizing there's majesty there. The first reaction is, I'm not really in any way able to handle this. I am not of this order. I can't possibly be used. But it is the point of departure, again ground zero, where Paul was at on the ground, or rather Saul at that stage, where Isaiah was at in the temple, and here where we have Simon Peter, amazed at this catch of fish, and the Lord then putting it on a different plane, indicating that he will be catching fish from, rather souls, men from henceforth, fisher of men. And so it is that this element of fishing souls is the point of departure of all those engaged actively in the Lord's service. They want to have that zeal for souls which characterized all the saints, also great mystics and contemplatives like St. Catherine of Siena, who had this strange expression, wanting to crunch souls, eat up souls. She meant by that she was wanting to save them at all costs, not let them be eaten up by the other one. And she would go to great lengths to do that, e.g., allowing Niccolò della Torre, this criminal, well actually he was only somebody who'd said something against the Republic, but he was condemned to death. And he wasn't praying all that much, but anyway, she allowed him to have a certain affective bonding towards her as a friend, which helped him then to have a more softened attitude towards his own condemnation. And he asked that she be present at his execution, and she was, and she held his chopped off head and felt the blood against her and its odour, as though it were a very pleasant odour, because she knew that his soul at the last had been saved. Thérèse of Lisieux, in the same way, made penances and intense prayers for the salvation of a hardened sinner, and was given to understand that she was heard, because that at the last moment was what happened. He consented to kiss the crucifix before being beheaded or guillotined in France. And so it is that other things too have happened. Jacques Fesch, in about 1957, in a prison in France, died in a state of great light and grace, even though being beheaded isn't an interesting way to die. He knew he was homeward bound, having received a great grace of conversion in prison itself. It can be a calming down place, a place of, as we say in these parts, of copping on. People get their act together sometimes when they have to just be between four walls. So prison can be a grace. Whereas people who are allowed to carry on in their hardening of heart and in increasing sin, never addressed, never corrected, may end up with a great surprise without the grace of a prison to calm them down and to give them cop on. So fishing souls is something that often happens in the context of preparing them for death, or going into a prison, or whatever it might be that puts a soul before its reality. If we talk about football and the weather until a person dies at his bedside, we are wasting time and delighting the demons. The salvation of a soul is serious stuff, and we need to be there. And only a priest can actually change eternity with security. People can pray, but there should be a priest when a person is dying, and the priest should be called before and not after the person has gone, and also before and not after the person is still lucid. A good confession is the best grace that can happen at the moment of death or just before. We need to remember that salvation is serious stuff. If a third of the angels have fallen, it means that we have huge cosmic powers against us, about a third of the spirits of the air against us and hating us and not wanting us to take their place. And therefore, it's an invisible battle, specifically and especially strong at the moment of death and just before it, because these are around wanting their pound of flesh and need to be protected. Therefore, we need to be protected with as much possible angelic force of prayer and grace, warmth and Christian presence against the powers of darkness. That's why it's rather sad when, by the 100, souls are allowed to spend their dying hours and even years just exposed to television in hospitals and nursing homes for hours on end, with nothing but swear words and blasphemy, pornography and ugliness coming through the air, when they're only a few meters from eternity.